Welcome back, champions, to the series of ranking the champions of Idle Champions in a tier list seat by seat. Today we're taking on seat 9 like it owes us money. You can expect to find a little bit of everything in this seat. Some DPS, some tanks, a little gold find, a healer, and kind of a speed champion. You know how we do it around here. We're starting with the core champion of the seat and working our way down alphabetically. That means today we're starting with our angy baby boy, Makos, the lawful evil tiefling warlock. He serves as potentially DPS and gold, or support. And while his support is pretty dead on average, he still fits in this seat pretty well. With only his second upgrade, he gets his specialization choice, which determines what his role will be in your formation between Dark Luck and Dark Blessing. Dark Luck will increase Makos' damage, as well as his gold find if he lands a killing blow. This was somewhat recently buffed, and actually Makos isn't a terrible damage dealer. A lot of early game players might be surprised by his output, though he's nothing amazing. He later gets Eldritch Alchemy to increase this effect, which scales with evil or warlock champions active in the formation, but only scales additively and is not increased by feats or gear. Dark Blessing, on the other hand, will increase the damage of all members of your formation who are not adjacent to Makos. This is further increased by Dark Power, which increases the effect of Dark Blessing if Makos is not on the edge of your formation. So if at all possible, try to squeeze him between some champions. But this isn't make or break. Now, while Dark Blessing will never be the best damage buffing ability, the thing is Makos fits quite well with so many different formations. He's a core champion that's easy to position, who is a DPS with a positional formation ability for Artemis. He is evil for Krond. He is a tiefling for potentially Farida's Pact Family or Potpourri for Ashara. And even if you don't need to match something special for your formation, he's a nice swap for a champion we'll be talking about next who has a sticky debuff. His ultimate is a simple, tight AoE, which can be useful for his Dark Luck spec, to kill a group of enemies to receive that increased gold on all of them. I think he's a solid B, as his damage buffing potential really isn't anything amazing. And as a damage dealer, he's flat average, but he fits pretty nicely into some formations, and he's available for every patron, so he will be useful throughout your playtime. And remember, I am doing these rankings based on their kit as is, not on item levels you might have for that character. And now we've got the objectively best champion in the seat, Aila, the chaotic neutral wild elf barbarian. She serves as a tank and support and is our next member of the Heroes of Erebos. Up to this point we've covered Sentry in Seat 4, Quillic in Seat 5, and Lucius in Seat 7, and they all synergize together with the Erebos Synergy Pool, to which they all contribute and draw from. And I'll go over Aila's once I explain her kit. To start, her primary attack can be useful, as it slightly knocks back the nearest enemy. But most of her kit revolves around Storm Aura, where every 4 seconds she debuffs a random enemy, quote, priming them, causing them to take more damage from all champions. This is a sticky debuff, meaning it persists even if she's swapped out of your formation, so keep that in mind. On top of that, she gains Storm Soul, where if she attacks an enemy that has been primed, they will be stunned for 2 seconds and then become, quote, electrified, further increasing the damage they take by a large amount, which is scaled through gear and defeat. And for a little extra crowd control sprinkled in, when she attacks an electrified enemy, all nearby primed enemies become electrified, and all electrified enemies are stunned for 0.5 seconds with Raging Storm. Now, even though they word it as damage from all champions for her debuff, it actually does include click damage as well, making her another excellent chaotic debuffer for a click damage formation, especially for being a tank. For defense in that tank role, she gets Shielding Storm, where she will gain a temporary hit point shield when she is attacked by an electrified enemy, equal to 10% of her maximum health for every electrified enemy on screen. This does an excellent job of keeping her in the fray, but there are a few problems with it. First of all, it has a pretty hefty internal cooldown of roughly 1 minute. When you're getting to the uh-oh stinky levels, the shield will just get shred through and then she's left with no unique defense for long enough that she'll drop. Her ultimate damages all enemies on screen, which also stuns them for 5 seconds, and damage is increased for each electrified enemy on screen. Her specialization choices are between reducing the time it takes to prime enemies on screen with Storm Aura to 2 seconds instead of 4, or doubling the stun duration of both Storm Soul and Raging Storm. So, what about her Arrowist synergy? She contributes 100% per electrified enemy on screen, to a maximum of 10,000%, or 1e4%, or 100 enemies. She draws an amount equal to 25% of the total pool to further increase the damage electrified enemies take by whatever that 25% is. Now let's take it all in. We've got a tank with a decent defense mechanic, whose damage buffing support is applied regardless of her position in your formation, with some decent crowd control tied to a sticky debuff that works with a click debuff formation. Sounds like she sneaks into S tier for me. Now you might think she's not the best in slot for my DPS. Okay, that's fair. But you can keep her in to electrify enemies, then swap in your preferred support in that seat to gain her damage buff on top of your preferred support. Just rock damn solid, baby. Next up is Birdsong, the lawful neutral Tabaxi Bard. She's a versatile champion that can serve as a decent damage dealer or decent support. Her design is centered around her Song of Battle, which increases the damage of those within 2 slots of her, including herself. She also gets Tempo of Battle, which increases the effect of Song of Battle whenever she hits an enemy, as well as Tempo of Victory, where if she lands a killing blow, she even further increases Song of Battle for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, and just resetting that timer each kill beyond that. With everything stacked up, Song of Battle is a pretty decent buff. Since she's a DPS and a positional buffer, she's also pretty good for Artemis. She has 2 different specialization choices that affect how she buffs the party. The first is based on alignment between good, neutral, and evil, where she doubles the output of Song of Battle on the chosen alignment. Something to note here, if you are or plan to be an Artemis main, know that this happens after Observance is calculated. So you'll always want to pick evil here for Artie. It does not affect how he observes from good or neutral champions if you pick otherwise. Her second choice increases the utility of Tempo of Victory, the first increasing her own damage by 400%, and increasing the duration of a victory stack to 1 minute instead of 15 seconds. The second allows it to be triggered from anyone's killing blow under the effect of Song of Battle, and the third triggers victory off landing an attack on a boss for those under the effect of Song of Battle. Basically, take the first if Birdsong is your DPS, take the second if she isn't and you're reliably landing killing blows with your DPS, or you're skipping bosses, and the third if you're walling on bosses or just in a particularly difficult variant with tough bosses. Her ultimate has her leap from enemy to enemy, dealing damage 5 times and stunning those hit for 5 seconds. And once she's finished, her attack cooldown is reduced by 50% for 15 seconds. Overall, Birdsong is pretty good. And while she probably won't be a focus for your main DPS, her support is nothing to scoff at. I think she's a good old B-. Time for our next evergreen champion as well as companion of the hall. The ever-familiar and popular Drizzt, the lawful good Drow Ranger. He serves as DPS in Goldfind, but sadly he's not a top-end damage dealer. Not terrible, but nothing amazing. But you are likely to find a use for his Goldfind. First, he has a 25% chance when he attacks to summon his panther, Gwenhwyvar, who will fight by his side for 30 seconds and attacks twice, dealing Drizzt's damage, but also causing a 20-second bleed. This is important, not particularly for the damage component, but for Drizzt's other abilities tied to his 2 scimitars. When he attacks an enemy that has been bled by, Gwen, with Icing Death, his first weapon, he deals a large amount more damage to that target, and will have his attack cooldown reduced by 50%. And his other scimitar, Twinkle, will cause him to deal AoE damage, and the target he hits has a 50% chance to miss their next attack. Note that he and Gwen will attack the nearest enemy, and Drizzt's primary attack rotates between hitting with Icing Death, then Twinkle, then both at the same time. Now, as a companion of the hall, he also adds to their collective pool of Goldfind. as we've mentioned with Bruner in Seat 1, Regis in Seat 2, Puent in Seat 5, and Caddy in Seat 7. But this is even more essential for Drizzt, as he also scales his damage for each member of the COTH slotted in your formation. His specialization choice is a simple one between either more gold find or damage, and his ultimate sends him into a flurry of attacking enemies and only stops once he doesn't one-shot them. And if you remember Rhea, Drizzt is one of the few champions that fit into getting the maximum effect of her Celestial champion, being both lawful and good as a DPS. He's decent, but he never shines at anything. He finds a place in a lot of gold find formations, and he might be an alright DPS if you're fairly new. But he's comparable to a lot of the DPS you'll already have. I think he hovers between a high C and low B, but for the sake of his gold find, I think he climbs to the low B. Coming in now is the one and only of a race and class we definitely need to see more of. Lazaapz, the neutral evil Goblin Artificer. She serves the party with the roles of tank and support, as she suits up in some power armor, which gains 1 stack every second she is not under attack. She gains a small percent more health per stack, the amount of which is scalable with gear, stacking additively. She will also gain Fury of the Small, which increases the damage of, quote, small champions, which include the races of Dwarf, Gnome, Halfling, Kobold, or Goblin. And this stacks for every small champion in your formation multiplicatively. Basically, your only DPS option here is Zorbu. No other DPS is really of note out of those options, until we get a champion that maybe allows other races to count as small the way Corazon does with neutral, though it is a decent buff for Zorbu mains. She also gets Tiny Bulwark, where if she comes under attack she will consume 10 stacks of her power armor to increase the effect of Fury of the Small for 10 seconds, with a 15-second cooldown. On top of this, she gets Lightning Launcher, where if she is under attack by at least 5 enemies, she consumes 15 stacks of power armor to activate this ability, which targets an enemy on screen and deals damage in a line, causing all enemies hit to take more damage from all sources. But this will always be a fairly small damage buff. Her specializations are a choice between doubling her power armor stack cap, or allowing the effects that trigger from her taking damage to instead trigger off anyone taking damage, or making Lightning Launcher trigger off only 1 enemy attacking her rather than 5. Basically use the first if she's your main tank so you can build up the big boy stacks to maintain your buffs. Take the second if you plan to have her in your formation but not in the front line, serving only as a support. And the last if she's a tank in a multi-tank frontline formation, so she can still reliably proc that Lightning Launcher. Her ultimate changes based on how many power armor stacks she has. If 20 and under, she will, quote, recharge, gaining full stacks and for the next 30 seconds will not consume any when triggering Launcher or Bulwark. If 21 and over, she will not gain any stacks for those 30 seconds, but will instead increase the effect of Bulwark and Launcher by 400%. Honestly, she's both clunky and restrictive. She's in a state where she wants to have maximum power armor stacks for her health, but she needs to trigger her formation abilities by constantly consuming them, though her ultimate certainly helps with this via recharge. She can work as a good swap for Aila if you're a Zorbu main, but yeah, I'd put her in a low C. Following Lazaapz is Môrgæn, the chaotic neutral High Elf Ranger. She joins your party with the support and gold tags, and while she technically has a tiny gold boost, she actually steals some of your gold. But we'll get to that. Her minor gold boost comes from Double Tap, where with her double shot primary attack, if she kills an enemy with the first arrow, the second will make the enemy drop a second set of gold. But she isn't a DPS champion, so that won't hold up for very long, and really that just equates as if there were another enemy on screen that you killed. So it's basically worthless. But the rest of her kit is far from worthless, starting with Paid Up Front, which I'm going to call Puff from here on out. Môrgæn will straight up take 25% of your dropped gold for herself, but increases the damage of all adjacent champions by a decent amount. This is further increased permanently by the highest gold amount Môrgæn has ever collected. This boosts Puff by 5% for every magnitude of gold collected. Or if you're using scientific notation, we're just talking the exponent, stacking additively. For example, if you look at mine, I'm at 1.98 E345. So we take that 345, multiply it by 5, and what do we get? by 1,725% boost. So if you're ever pushing your highest wall with the intention to farm gold, don't forget to swap in Môrgæn for at least a little while so she can get a piece of that action. And again, once achieved, this persists through resets. She also gets Friends and Wealth, which increases the damage of all champions by an amount per champion slotted with the gold tag, stacking multiplicatively. And her ultimate shoots out a random arrow between dealing damage in a line, exploding to deal AoE damage, or placing a dot on the target for 300% damage over 20 seconds. And she has 3 separate specialization choices, which will determine her placement in your formation and how she buffs Puff. Her first is a choice between keeping Puff to those adjacent, or those not adjacent, or those in front of her, or those behind her. The second is a choice between 4 options, which will be the same ones you choose from for her third choice. So you're basically picking the 2 you like best out of the 4 options. To start, there is flat increasing the damage buffing potential of Puff by 300%, or to increase it by 75% per adjacent champion additively to a maximum of 450% for 6 adjacent champions if your formation permits it, or increasing it by 20% each time an enemy attacks a champion within 2 slots of Môrgæn, capping out at 20 stacks for a total of 400%, if you could maintain it, or increasing it by 10% each second an enemy is not killed, capping at 60 or 600%. So pick the 2 that best fits the situation of your run and your formation. I think she's a B-, almost down to a C since she's only viable to a single patron. But she's very adaptable for your formation and a contender for best raw damage buffer in the seat. Let's dive into a very unique champion with Yes Man. Nordom, the lawful good Môdrôn fighter, tagged only as support. This champion was designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is the formation ability Môdrôn Core Toolbox, which increases the XP earned to a Môdrôn Core with a formation that Nordom is slotted in. This is the only formation ability of its kind and is insanely useful if you have some Môdrôn Cores to level up. Now Nordom does have some basic formation abilities as well, but they're nothing amazing. Let's break them down. To start, there is Form Orderly Ranks, which increases the damage of champions in front of him by a low to average amount. This is further increased by 100% for each lawful champion in the formation, stacking multiplicatively, with Rule of Law. The specialization choice here is simply between making Nordom's primary attack, which shoots 2 crossbow bolts at the nearest enemy, either debuff the enemy's hit to take 100% more damage for the next 10 seconds, stacking up to 2 times additively, or causing the bolts to explode on impact, pushing back the enemy's hit a short distance. And his ultimate summons an army of Môdrons to march through the battlefield, dealing damage to all enemies who dare stand in their path. Nordom's kind of a hard one to put in a tier list, so I'll say this. If you have Môdrôn cores that need to be leveled up, he's kind of like A to S to have in your formation if you care about leveling them up faster. But his buffing is in the very low C to D range, so we'll average him out somewhere in the low B. But if you've leveled your Môdrôn cores, you will probably never be using him again. Strange, useful, and useless. Lastly, we have Shaka, the neutral good Tiefling Warlock, who serves as a healer and support, and is a member of the Rivals of Waterdeep. His entire kit revolves around him attempting to solve a celestial puzzle, which manifests in your formation. You'll see 4 slots tagged by either a race, role, or gender, which are selected completely randomly. You're rewarded with a stacking multiplicative buff for each slot correctly filled, which is even further increased by each Rival of Waterdeep active in your formation. He also later increases this with Feast or Famine, where every celestial slot he is personally adjacent to will increase celestial puzzles output. Overall, this can reach decent heights, and there are gear and feats attached to it. Nothing crazy, but above average. His healing comes into play with Celestial Resistance, where he gives temporary hit points to the entire party when changing areas. The overall amount is increased additively for each correctly filled celestial slot in the formation. He has 2 different specialization choices, the first being between adding a 5th celestial slot in the formation or re-rolling the currently selected celestial puzzle tags. Ideally, you'll always want that 5th slot, because it's so important for scaling his damage buffing potential. You'll only want to reroll if you just flat can't make use of what was presented to you. Though at that point, you probably might as well just reset your run, to be perfectly honest. The second choice is between how to utilize his ultimate. The first pushes enemies back and creates a beam of light in front of your formation, dealing damage to enemies that pass through it and debuffing them, causing them to deal 75% less damage for 30 seconds. And the second creates a beam of light near where enemies spawn, and similarly deals damage to those that go through it. But if you deal at least 1% of their health, there is a 50% chance they will disintegrate entirely. They are debuffed and take 100% more damage for 30 seconds. He's in a strange place. While his buffing potential is decent, it's not quite as good as his limitations would suggest. The restrictions of his celestial puzzle can make or break your formation if you plan on using him. And that can be a kind of fun or really frustrating thing to work around. He is available for every patron, which is handy. And what's with so many tieflings being available for everything? Anyway, I'd rank him a firm C. He's not bad, but he's not amazing. And while his buffing could reach the B tier, it can be a hassle to get there. And that's all for Seat 9. Don't forget to leave a comment, maybe about how the current 1D&D's change to critical strikes as it stands from what we have right now is absolute garbage. We can only hope they come to their senses. If you're still hanging around, I'd love it if you gave me a fatty like, sub, and bell. Stay tuned because I'm always working on the next one. Oh yeah, and if you have any plans to play this game on Steam, don't forget to log in between September 7th, 10 AM to September 14th, 12 PM, where they are offering free champions and free gold chests, which also includes an exclusive familiar, the Hand of Vecna, with 2 guaranteed shiny equipment cards for every free champion, which includes Deacon, Spurt, Kroll, Human, and Torgar. And believe me, you want those shinies for at least Kroll and Human. Have a hell of a time out there, Pterodactyls.